A few months ago, I made a couple videos regarding PSO2 and GS. I didn't stop making these videos because there was nothing to talk about or I stopped caring, quite the contrary. I just got tied up with life in graduate school, which my first year is officially complete and I keep my 4.0 GPA, so that's exciting. But if you're new around here, let me introduce myself. My name's Larry, and I make gaming content with the games I'm playing and I'm excited for it. This is my second of two channels with similar branding, the first being my anime channel right over here. I'm not afraid to say things like they are and call out the worst of the games industry and the players who perpetuate bad practices. So if you want to hear me get upset over video games or riz them up, God, I can't believe I just said that, then hit that subscribe button and let's get into what will arguably be a lengthy but important video on the current state of Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis. Before I really get into things here, I'm just one person who spends too much time on this game across 5 characters and all 4 global ships. I get to see the best and the worst of this game. So before I left for my sister's college graduation on Thursday, I stumbled upon a video by one of this game's, in quotes, official creators, Krono Katastrophy. He made a lot of great points in his breakdown about some of the issues this game faces, and it got me thinking. As players continue to bleed from this game again after the Vile update in February, is SEGA really even listening to our feedback? I understand having pride in your work, and this game has made a lot of great changes since launch, but many of the issues this game faces seem to go unheralded by both SEGA and the PSO2 community. Let me put that a different way. Is anybody giving SEGA and the development team any feedback at all whatsoever? Krono spent a lot of time talking about gear and fixing said gear with proper items, augments, fixes, etc, etc. Basically, he criticized the game's player market and the failure of some players to understand how to properly fix gear when everything is there for you to learn how to do that. Well, it used to be. Now that you can add more money to Sega's emptying pockets in regards to their budget for this game, you have the ability to skip the story entirely and just pay your way to a high level without understanding the game's mechanics whatsoever. The Epith Arany gear and DSEM armors are great free gear, but that's just it. It's free gear. I remember the debate over the Argenti weapons and how they don't have a crit rate or something. It's been a while, so I can't remember if it was the Argenti series or not, and how exactly all of that worked. But what Krono was saying was that it was both a good and a bad thing. I agree that it was a good thing, but that good thing led to some bad decisions, and I think that's what started the whole Exalio and Aerodim Clearodim weapons series. When players can just skip useful tutorials to get the free endgame gear, what you're doing is you're telling players they don't need to understand the game or how it works. Need to affix better augments because the LCL augments are hindering your DPS. If you're a solo player who doesn't have many friends or an alliance in this game, you're not going to get the help you need, if you decided to skip all the way to the current end of the game. Let me backtrack about a minute. The introduction of Nameless City was really cool, especially since it was a combat zone with a ton of verticality. If you're like me and like to jump around on things while you're listening to music, it's a cool place. This introduced the EX augments on Aerodim weapons and allowed you to enhance your weapons with actually decent augments that had some very useful effects. So, using these EX1 and 2 augments, players have a free way to affix useful items to their weapons, at the very least. To me, it seemed like Krono didn't like the idea of free gear because it incentivizes players not to upgrade their gear. I agree with that, but let me offer my own take on that. SEGA knows this game is hemorrhaging players. You can argue the almost 6% bump in the last 30 days nullifies that argument, but that's only because of the Super Origin Festival event. Other platforms likely haven't seen much more of a rise, if any. Look at how the game lost an entire fourth of its player base in March after the Vile update the previous month. Vile was cool and the associated story and plot implications are still pretty massive, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. What SEGA did with the Epith Arany free gear and armors was it allowed everyone who has a high enough level after equipping to do endgame content with no obvious repercussions. Well, that's the red herring here. It's just fine for the solo story fights and grinding out in combat zones, but it holds players back, those who want to max out their gear and spend the time doing so. The non-LC versions of augments in this game, such as Lux Hal Finale, have different multipliers on them for your potency compared to the LC versions. If you're running gear that is majority LC augments, your potency during boss fights, such as the current Solus Urgent Quest, will probably top out somewhere between 5 and 6,000, whereas players who use the non-LC versions of those augments will probably double that, if not more than, if their gear has no LC augments. This does not take into effect Anati, Rati, Larze, etc. augments. Free gear is a red herring because it distracts players from one of the game's biggest problems, which is low DPS, potency, and high potency required content. It's frustrating failing a timed boss in the current dual LTQ because someone doesn't know how to upgrade their gear. SEGA did this because they want people playing the game. Japan is capitalist, just like the United States, which means big business is really only in it for the money. Why else do you think 1 month of premium requires you to buy an oddly specific amount of AC? It's because you have to buy more than what you actually need to purchase the premium set. The same goes for the AC only augment scratch tickets. People want the best loadouts, therefore they buy AC, play the scratch, get what they want, and sell the rest. That or they just whale it. Everything else goes into the player shop for millions of meseta. It's a chain reaction. The whales buy the new stuff, slap exorbitant prices on it, and expect the occasional ARX cash buyer to undercut someone else when they're selling AC scratch ticket items so that they can afford the new augments, or whatever it may be, but augments more so for the pay-to-win power creep. From a game design standpoint, I get it. You want everyone to enjoy and play the new content, because the more players you have in a game, the more likely some of them are to purchase some level of microtransactions. Of course, it isn't just SEGA that does this. Most gaming companies adopted this model upon the introduction of loot boxes or supply drops years ago. Remember all those supply drop opening videos? If the publisher developer truly cares about their players, free gear isn't just something to attract players so they buy more shit. The next problem I want to address that Krono also talks about is the game's content. This is something I mentioned in February, and it's directly attributable to what I like to call the Fortnite effect. I actually don't know who coined this term, but games nowadays have to have near constant updates and playable content or players decide the game isn't worth their time. Fortnite, back when it first launched its Battle Royale mode, was updating the game and LTMs almost weekly. There was something different to do week after week. This has since taken a back seat with the introduction of the whole creative scene and collabs, but the effect it had on other games was anything but negligible. Call of Duty was really the first to follow suit with weekly to bi-weekly updates, huge season content drops in marketing, and buggy launches that persisted well into the game's lifecycle. Warzone became the culmination of all of this as a way to compete, and, well, look at the massive cheating problem the game has now. I might lose my voice when I make the inevitable Call of Duty video. But you know what NGS does? Mission passes, themed events, collaborations with other media, NGS Wave and associated marketing. The Fortnite effect. This isn't something that's bad, per se, but it's the content itself that is lacking. As Krono put it, this stuff has no staying power. The LTQs or 80% rehashed stuff from years past or increased enemy levels for added difficulty, that doesn't make content. That's called laziness and a lack of ideas. Can you imagine if we got a 420 themed event with Seth Rogen like Black Ops 6 is doing right now? I mean, how stupid and unoriginal do you get there? Thankfully, NGS doesn't have to deal with that kind of nonsense, and I should add, in the middle of May, but the stuff we do get either leaves in a week or becomes so monotonous that you get tired of it after your 5th run. The rare drop rates are so low most of the time that it isn't even worth it. Not to mention that you get the worst loot drops like level 10 armors and Alt Souls 1 and the like gear and augments. Why is this an LTQs and urgent quests? Are we trying to perpetuate bad gear habits for players who know no better? I understand not being able to implement a casino or similar features. That's a pretty fiery path to tread at the moment and probably not a good idea. Still though, that doesn't mean you can't do player surveys to get a feel for player retention, ideas, and satisfaction. Look at Weathering Waves, just blowing everyone else out of the water. Krono understands things aren't perfect, even during testing, which is why they send surveys to see how the player base is reacting to new content. Just recently they offered free 10 pulls because the community spoke up and said things were not to their liking, which is a can of worms in of itself that I have my own opinions on, but I digress. Someone in a comment on one of my previous videos commented about holding fashion shows, line strike tourneys, creative space showcases, and other ideas that SEGA could easily turn into community events. I do understand leaving this up to the players themselves, but most of the time, these are announced through Alliance-specific discords and are not public to the ship as a whole, which makes sense. To that avail, why not do more screenshot contests like we used to have, or implement creative space showcases where the creator has their own space shown on the TVs in each base, with consent of course. That could easily be something someone could host and have little text comments that explain the creator's thinking on certain aspects rather than a full-on commentary. Do public line strike tourneys, incentivize players to try the mode out. For me, I have no interest in line strike. It's full of original PSO characters and such, which is really cool, but not something I'd really understand since I haven't played the OG games. I have no connection to those characters and the gameplay itself seems lackluster, but that could be because the developers haven't made an effort to market it in a way that would attract players to the mode. The VTuber collaborations are cool, but the Niji-Sanji collabs are playing with fire. Why not reach out to other corporations and ask if they'd be willing to collaborate with NGS? Even just specific VTubers would be fine, since there are so many talented and fun individuals in the community to begin with. I remember when they'd play the actual game and do live streams and screenshots with the players themselves in groups, but that hasn't been done for the better part of 3 years now. And even then, I'm pretty sure that was Hololive and not Niji-Sanji. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, the content we do get lacks staying power. There is nothing to do when you're burnt out except stand around and suggestively lick a popsicle or be a nuisance in area chat. It's like Krono said, none of this stuff is memorable anymore. The stuff that was is long gone, and doesn't look to return anytime soon. You get entire chunks of story that seek to explain the world, Alpha, years after the game's release. What is the point of that? 3 years after Item's introduction, and you're just now telling me about the strange gravity in the region or the overclocking dolls do when they turn red? That's not world building or immersion. While this is more so directed at the region-specific features, it should be noted that these are all things that should have been explained in the game's early days, when regions were still being introduced. Story is content, and content is story. To that avail, I'm going to repeat what I said in a previous video. Good game design happens when the developers of a game listen to their players and implement that feedback accordingly. Bad game design happens when you straight up ignore your community and don't make any changes or make meaningful changes. That's how a game dies. For example, Infinity Nikki devs did something recently that has that game's community up in arms. I don't currently play any of the Nikki games, but hearing developers make bad game design decisions is painful and deters not just me, but other players as well from wanting to play the game. I'm not an expert, and I don't claim to be, but I did study game design for 4 years and was hands-on in the creation and feedback implementation cycles. At the very least, I can offer my perspective and insight on something that a lot of people probably have not dabbled in to begin with, ever. You can't make a good game that offers a live service model like NGS if you're not going to be an active member of the community on social media and or in-game, or you refuse to make community asked for features. A great example of this is when Infinity Ward decided not to add Dead Silence back as a part in the Modern Warfare reboot series, and fans hated that. Sledgehammer Games later corrected that mistake, but it goes to show that you will lose players, and you will get ire from the gaming community when you refuse to listen to your players. Look at the reactions official Call of Duty accounts get on Facebook. More laugh reacts than anything. The subreddits even remove posts of people calling other players out for cheating when they have direct evidence of such actions. What does NGS even do on social media anymore? I have tweet notifications on for the official global account, but I never see them anymore, because they only post before and after the headlines with the same information we already know and have received. They don't even post helpful content like how to fix augments to an item or a weapon. I mean, they don't help you with any content whatsoever. If there's nothing else happening with the game, contests, the account is pretty quiet. I remember when they used to make really nice posts on Fridays or try to incorporate a little humor. What happened to that? To creativity and fun? What happened to having a unique identity? It's frustrating watching the game kill itself off like this. I'm not here to entertain those who see no wrong with this game, nor am I always this negative. I love Wuthering Waves, and my next video on that will be only praise. Call of Duty has always been a part of my life, hence why I mention it here, but that video when it drops will be all criticism because what in the world happened to that franchise? I'll say this again later, but I love NGS, and I want to see the game and PSO series succeed. But when you have things like overinflated player markets and paywall incentives for premium users like the personal shop that are generally pretty sparse, 2 SG per lookbook like for 5 likes, player shop access, 10% food buff boost. What else do you have to offer players? There is zero reason to sell the new AC support scratch augments at 30 million Meseta an augment. That is manipulative, and not at all worth the boost in potency you'll get using only one of them. Players who whale content like this should be restricted from player shop use because it inflates the entire economy. This is what inflation looks like, just on a smaller level and inside a video game. Who actually enjoys spending hours upon hours grinding out deck space, just to make 1/30th the cost of a single augment per hour? If you have boosters, consider yourself lucky, because most people don't. And these don't always show up in the SG shop either. Honestly, maybe they should, though, with the way people are selling literal hairstyles for the same 30 million Meseta or more. Whaling should not be encouraged, but I can't tell you how to fix it without developers giving something an already fixed max price to try and tamper this absurdity. I guess you could just substantially raise the shop fee to something like 30 to 50% so that whales have no choice but to sell a new hairstyle for 80 million to make a profit, because no one is dumb enough to pay that much for something. I hope. One whale encourages another, which then makes what used to be decent money worth next to nothing, forcing players to spend countless hours telling people in deck space to stop doing trials before 4 bars, and then getting mad at someone who didn't even know better because they were never told. Not only is this toxic behavior, it makes players feel bad because it's not something that was ever explained to them. Why is Waker the best class to use in decks? Why is using close combat classes not a good idea for Meseta farms? It's all about speed and how fast you can kill the dolls. Waker has a wide ranged attack, Return Breath I think it's called, but Force and Tactor also have spread shot if you use the Talus. Force is good for PP preservation, which is why you'll see that used as a subclass. That took less than a minute to explain, and it wasn't even that hard. We should not be perpetuating bad behavior. This would be a great example of something for the social media accounts to share to explain to people how to do the dex-based farm for PSE burst trials. I understand that not every PSE burst comes from 4 bars in the PSE burst meter, but that's something else that the social media accounts could also explain to players. The Ina and Mana trial is a guaranteed PSE burst, and that's just one example of just a handful of discrepancies that do occur. But the underlying problem still remains. What is 30 million Meseta now used to be about 10 million 2 years ago because players have been Pavloved into thinking everything is worth 5 times what it's actually worth. Do you not see the problem with that? Sure, there are more ways than ever to earn more Meseta, but 100k isn't going to help you make a whole lot of progress on 30 million. The player market has spiraled out of control and it's only been getting worse. I had to spend over 50 million Meseta just to get the new Fantastic Symphony AC scratch, register the thigh highs base wear to make a pattern to all of my characters. The hairstyles are still north of 20 million Meseta. An expensive hairstyle used to be 2 to 3 times cheaper. New weapons, if they're maxed out and upgraded, I can understand, but even then, these new weapons are not offering a substantial increase in battle power compared to their predecessors. Look, some of you were not happy about my last 2 videos on this game, and I quite frankly don't care to entertain people who find no wrongs with this game, because someone has to start this conversation. I've seen a couple Krono videos where he goes over burnout and issues he's been seeing with the game, and Krono's video got recommended to me in my other account just last week. This conversation needs to happen if the game wants to survive. The Steam player count at its lowest point has almost dipped below 1,000 players now. That's not a good sign, and it points to larger issues within the game itself. Someone pointed my DPS out to me, and I told them that until someone makes the damage calculations a non-calculus formula, I would upgrade my gear when I had the Meseta materials to do so, something I am actually currently working on. I know what augments are good and which are bad. The problem lies within many of the aforementioned problems I've identified with this game. Everything runs off of Meseta. If you don't have enough, you're stuck in a tier of players who are almost entirely locked out of endgame content because the player market has decided to bend them over with no lube. Putting the Trisalia weapons and Tristasis armors in the Meseta shop for only 30k Meseta is brilliant. Not only do you get good quality gear into the hands of everyone, it's cheap and easily upgradable with the current enhancement campaigns for the Exalio series weapons and respective armors. Unfortunately, your potency is largely influenced by your augments, and continually setting that bar higher and higher relegates lower potency players to sit and watch from afar, dreaming of the day they too can hit 20k DPS. While I'm fortunate enough to actively work on my gear, bit by bit, others aren't. Grand Dread Keeper 2s are hundreds of thousands of Meseta in the shop at the moment, and the same goes for things like Lux Hal Finales. That's not affordable if you want the maximum 9 or 10 augments you'll need for the greatest chance of success to affix them. Now, you're talking about 6 million Meseta for 4 separate pieces of gear. 24 million Meseta plus the small cost it takes to affix. Can you imagine doing that for similarly priced augments? Of course, you can just buy the lower tier augments you need to craft the top tier stuff, but that isn't cheap either. Base augments like Half-Finales are actually reasonable these days, finally. For items priced around 50 to 100,000 Meseta, just as an example, you're talking 2 to 4 million respectively. That's a much more manageable number, if things were actually priced like that. And the real slap in the face is that you need 5 to 10 of those lesser augments for one of the top tier augments. Starting to see the problem here? I love this game and I want to see it succeed, but poor game decisions and lack of meaningful content and explanations in the story and multiplayer are turning players away. Some people are playing other games and will return in due time, but that's your problem. NGS is being outdone by other games people want to play more. I understand that this game is different than the rest of the games like it and other gacha-like games, but that's not an excuse to neglect the game, first and foremost. It's only through player-created websites and softwares that some aspects of this game are even usable. The Arx Visiphone? Entirely player-run. If anyone is familiar with PSO Melee, they've offered entire spreadsheets to the community to calculate damage across different weapon series, as well as other useful tools. We wouldn't have some of these things we do if someone didn't first say something and bring attention to it. I'm not sure who thinks 20 SG and a 1 hour 100% rare drop rate booster are adequate compensation for game-breaking bugs and glitches, and the inability to sort EX2 augments from EX1 augments in the player shop search when the clear team weapons were introduced. Yeah, another bug that players exploited to trick other players out of their Meseta. A bug that quality assurance testers should have caught, so who knows what's going on there. I'm not afraid to be critical, because I've learned that you have to communicate in order to achieve something. A married couple can't just bicker and argue and hope to keep their marriage alive if they're not communicating with one another and what the issue is. Kids, finances, job stress, health, the same thing applies here. A game cannot survive if developers are unwilling to listen to players and implement appropriate feedback. I see your comments, and some of the ones are clearly people who are content with the game as it is currently, even though it is actively losing players. Look at the orange bars in the block transfer at the Ryuker devices. If anyone has screenshots of when there used to be like 7 or 8 Alio blocks and 3+ full blocks, I'd love to see those. It would be around the 2022 time frame. Just DM me on Twitter or X, or if you have my Discord, DM me there. I'm very well aware developers can't implement every single piece of feedback they receive. That would be insane. It's up to developers to decide what and how much they want to use. And I know SEGA and this game's developers understand that. There are players who give terrible feedback, obviously. Those are the people you see running around with the balloon bosoms for their butts and chests, are the ones who do erotic roleplay in area chat. You're a problematic community within a community. If you've noticed, like me, problematic players, to any degree, becoming more common, it's because they've always been there, but with less players now, you see them more often. Anyways, I know the majority of people watching these videos understand that this game needs more attention from SEGA. And the problem seems to lie in the fact that the Japanese servers get far more attention than the global servers. In that case, either offer global more support or just decouple the global version of the game from the parent IP, since there's no story connection anyways. You could transfer publishers even, like Tower of Fantasy did, to one that cares about the game and its players. This script is almost as long as the short story I wrote for my Literary 3 final, so I'm closing this out here. Thanks for watching and listening to me yap. If you want less inflamed stuff and like anime, go check out my anime channel. I'm a little more than 100 subscribers away from 1,000 over there. Alrighty then. See you either next video or to those I play with. See you online later today.